Hi, and welcome to another episode of Therapist Sanctuary. I'm Jen Westcott, and I am here today with my long time, well, we've been in every fucking role you can imagine together, friend, co, I was going to say co-parent, but that's not quite right. Raised our kids
I
at
guess.
around the same time, work
Mhm.
together. Oh, just it goes on and on. Christina, welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy you're here. And as you know, there's no preset questions or anything. We're just going to see what comes out. But Therapist Sanctuary podcast is a place where people kind of nerd out about all things therapy, but also talk about healing. And it originally was for therapists to listen to, but it's expanded. So non-therapists um, have been on the show and they have lots to offer about what's helped them and what's not. And so we're just going to talk about all that.
Sounds good.
Why don't you start by filling filling me in like I don't know on your journey to become a therapist? Oh my God, how far back do you want to go?
Wow. Okay. So I um my first experience with therapy was when I was in high school. I didn't know then that I wanted to become a therapist,
Mhm.
but when I went to university, I had a dream of being a veterinarian until I took university level biology and discovered I absolutely hated it. So I bounced around and after a while eventually did a degree in psychology.
Mm.
And I loved it. I loved it. And I really wanted to do grad school. And I mean, that was back in the 90s. So counseling was, I would say, not a super easy profession to start in. Like most people getting into counseling were more like psychologists doing post grad work and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
The reality of life was I needed money because I had to support myself and I could not keep going to school. So I became a police officer because that was a natural transition.
And in the end, maybe
Um,
it was.
yeah, it was pretty cool. All these experiences. It's funny, when you when you're trying to plan your life and then all of a sudden you realize that you just when you look back, it seems like there's no other way you could have ended up where you are. But when
Yeah.
I became a police officer, I wasn't thinking, well, this is clearly going to lead to me becoming a counselor.
Right. When you became a police officer, like, did you feel like the psychology stuff you loved came into play day to day, or were you sort of in like, now I'm police officer mode, I just am gonna deal with shit? Like, how did that feel?
Yeah, no, I was definitely more interested in the psychology of things. I loved the Mental Health Act calls, the MHA calls, as we called them.
Oh, yeah.
I actually quite enjoyed that going and dealing with people. I mean, I didn't love it when it happened 5 minutes before my shift was supposed to be over, but aside from that, I think from the beginning, I just always looked at people out in the world and thought that could be me, no matter who I was dealing with and no matter what they were doing. Um, I always had this sort of belief that I could have ended up with some of those struggles. Well, and I have struggles of my own throughout my
Mm.
life.
That's
And
so interesting you say that because I have often felt that too. There isn't
mm,
a person I've seen, a homeless person, an addicted,
mhm.
like that I haven't gone, that could have been me.
Yeah,
It does
yeah,
make it more relatable when you project yourself into it.
yeah, very much. Yeah. So I kind of had dreams of maybe getting into um, polygraph or forensic psychology and, that kind of realm.
Hmm.
I did end up doing some very basic forensic work. Like I became what was called a scenes of crime officer. So I had like, I don't know, baby forensics, I guess you could call it.
Like they
I
let
could
you put the
fingerprint.
yellow tape up?
Well, I could dust like a vehicle for fingerprints or things like that, just because I was in such a small place at the time.
Yeah.
So we didn't have ident, forensic identification unit, available to us. So yeah, so that was really fun. But then life, life again gave me sort of some information that maybe I wanted a more balanced lifestyle.
Mm,
And so I looked for something I could transition to that would be a natural transition from what I was doing, but more, maybe less shift work, less violence. It kind of reached a point where I thought I couldn't imagine being home with my 2 year old. I didn't have children yet, but we were talking about kids. Couldn't imagine being home with a baby and then leaving my baby to go fight people outside the bar. It just was too, the
yeah.
two worlds, just I couldn't figure out how to make them meld. People do, and that's fantastic, but for me, it was too
Mhm.
drastic of a shift in identity, being this
Yeah.
nurturing, loving person that I wanted to be, and then a little bit later heading
Clubbing
out the
somebody
door.
over the head.
Yeah, exactly. We're
And was
getting
part of
all the
it
pay.
like was part of that fear of kind of what can happen in that work too, if you have a baby at home and or did you
You know what? At that time, no, it didn't become fear until I actually had children and I was
uh,
already out of the force. Um, I wasn't afraid at that point. I kind of look back and realize I was actually okay with dying. My life didn't really matter to me at that point.
okay,
That was one of the,
let's go into that.
there's a juicy bit for you.
Oh yeah, I'm not passing that by. And did you know then why you felt that way or did you kind of discover
No,
it later looking back or what was it
I
about? If you don't mind
I think
saying.
it was, I don't think I even really realized that I guess I realized I didn't mind if I died, but I didn't realize that that was significant.
Or that everybody
Um,
didn't feel that way all the time?
yeah, I thought, doesn't everybody feel that way? Like I kind of thought, if, if I was to die while I was doing police work, then that was okay because I didn't really matter.
Mm.
And I didn't
Oh, that's
realize how sad that was.
yeah, and
It just was.
that's gotta be childhood stuff right there.
You think?
I'm just I'm just taking a stab in the dark at that.
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah.
sad.
Yeah, I went through a period where I realized how sad it was, and um now I'm at peace with it. It's just where I was at that time. But yeah, very sad. I would certainly, it would really hit me if someone else felt that way,
Mhm.
you know.
And
But
you're
at the
probably
time, I
really,
just thought,
really attuned to those clients because I mean, isn't that the way it goes with therapists? Like, we're really good at giving people what we never got.
I think so. I think that's the people we're drawn to. And then also the flip side of that is being careful not to color their experience with mine. So
Oh, we're not
maintaining
supposed to
that
do that?
sense. Well, I think inevitably we do it, but it's maintaining that duality, in our minds. Like there's
Yeah.
them and then there's us. And it's
Yeah.
okay that the two are related or crossover, or sometimes it's really informative, but sometimes it can get in the way if we don't keep track of that.
So going back to that feeling of not really caring if you died or not, and
Hmm.
like having an awareness at some point that not everybody felt that way. Um, what I've noticed is when people, such as myself, I had a similar, but it wasn't around dying. It was more around, I didn't realize other people felt feelings. I realized
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel my life.
Hmm.
And it kind of occurred to me over time that that was because it had been that way from the beginning, necessary. Like it's not like it changed one day. Like I'd never felt that it was safe to feel the insides of myself.
Wow. Yeah.
So was it that way for you? Like, was it sort of like a long-standing childhood? What was your childhood like? Let's
Well, aside from rage, I don't know if I would have known a feeling if it hit me over the head.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I get
that
that.
was really, either was okay. I think I was pretty good at looking like I was a functional human.
Mhm.
Um, but I didn't have a full range of emotions to draw on.
And what do
It's
you make of that now? How do you make sense of that?
Well, yeah, so in my childhood, I go back to, I remember, I wish I could remember names and things, but one brilliant person at some point talked about babies when they first start that very first beginning of awareness. All they're aware of is, I'm okay, I'm not okay.
Mm,
And if they're not okay, they cry. And if they are okay, they don't cry. Maybe they goo or burble, and then it grows from there. So I
yeah.
think I was very, you know, probably pre-verbal, still in my emotional development, precognitive,
Mm.
um, and only really aware if I was okay or not okay. And most of the time I felt not okay. Um, so I was just always managing. And then when I couldn't manage, I'd erupt in rage or frustration or fury. Sometimes it would just go inwards, like I'd have nowhere to direct it. But when I
Mhm.
did, I'd find someone or something to blame. I could be very blamey when I look back.
Maybe you were blamed.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember a few stories. There were stories along the way. I remember realizing that, kind of what you said earlier, not everybody had the same experience. Um, so like one story was when my brother was little. I have two much younger siblings,
Mhm.
and my mom was a single teenage mom. So I just want to take
Mm.
this opportunity to say that I really feel she did her best, and I really have come to peace with a lot of things. But there were a lot of things I just didn't get that I really needed, and it really harmed me.
How
So
old
it took
was
a
she
long,
when she had you?
she was barely 17. She was
Okay.
16 when she got pregnant, and she turned 17 like 6 weeks before I was born. So
Okay.
she was a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so your
So
brother,
what's that?
you were gonna say a story about your brother?
Oh yeah, my brother was a baby, my sister was a toddler, and my job was to look after them in the evenings. My mom had an evening job. And I remember one day she was must have been getting ready for work, and my brother was just learning to crawl. So he was less than a year, maybe 8 months or something. But he hadn't quite figured out how to coordinate his front hands. So at one point, I was watching him, but he went to move his one hand and just forgot to move it and rolled forward and banged his face on the ground, started to cry, went over and picked him up, and I was soothing him. And my mom came flying out from the kitchen, and his lip was bleeding because he had a tooth. He'd put his tooth through his lip. And she just erupted in rage at me for allowing this to happen to him. And I remember feeling so, it's that impotent anger, and
Ooh, yeah.
betrayal too. Here I am trying to watch him and look after him, and basically not having a life to look after my two siblings. And she loses it on me because he's learning to crawl, and he did what all normal babies do. He fell, and he was actually
Right.
okay. It was a little bit of blood on his lip. So
And how old
huge
would
blame.
you have been at that time?
I would have been maybe 14, probably
And that's more than what you're describing as
12.
more than sometimes you babysat.
Yeah.
It was like
Oh
you were the
yeah.
main caregiver.
At times, yeah. Like the evenings were mine.
Wow.
And I remember, so my siblings had a different dad, and I just remember my mom, when I would try and argue it sometimes, like, why do I have to look after them every night? My friends get to go out, and she would say things like, it's your duty to contribute to the household, and this is how you contribute. And I would argue that maybe their dad should look after them. And she would say, he's worked hard all day. He shouldn't have to come home and look after children. He should be able to have the evening off.
Wow.
And when I
Sounds like
would
a rock
say, like,
star.
what about me having the evening off? Or what about
Right.
me being able to go out with my friends or watch TV or whatever? And she just dismissed it. Like it just wasn't important to her. She wasn't, I was like an extension of her, I think, in her mind. If she
Hmm.
couldn't quite manage whatever she had taken on, then it was my job to fill in. And that would happen with kids that she babysat. She babysat in the daytime. And then we had the evenings she worked. So sometimes she went through a period of time, she was really sick, actually. Her gallbladder was acting up. She ended up having surgery. So she was in bed a lot with back pain and because gallbladder causes pain in the back, I guess. I haven't had that particular pleasure myself.
Me neither.
Um, but she would keep me home from school sometimes to look after the kids that she was babysitting. And I started like freaking out a bit because I was missing a lot of school. And she would just say, like, I went to school. School's no big deal. Like, I know what it's like to go to school. It's nothing. Well, I mean, she stopped school in grade 9, you know.
Right.
She wasn't
Wow.
school focused. I was very school focused. Like that was my only social connection, outside the home and some extended family. I did have some extended family that I connected with, but in terms of, having a life, school
Mm.
was my life outside home.
And other than that, it sounds like you didn't get to have any life.
No, no, not at all.
So did it, you said you had your first experience in high school with a counselor. Like, was it related to this just building and building until you couldn't stand it?
Well, yeah, and that was the funny thing. Like that was back in the day when school counselors didn't really do counseling, if you know what I
No.
mean. They were guidance counselors was what they
Right.
were called.
Yeah.
And we had two. Um, and so basically a series of events happened. I freaked out at school. It was around, I mean, it's a bit of a story, which isn't really important, but I got really activated at school and couldn't calm down. So I was just crying and crying and crying and
Mm.
basically hysterical. So eventually it was about being late and having late slips and detentions and stuff. It just put me over the
Mm.
edge. So eventually the office took me down the hall to the guidance counselor and they're like, yeah, we don't know what to do with her. So the guidance
This
counselor
one's
sat
too
with me
far
for,
gone.
so exactly. So the guidance counselor sat with me for a little bit and I couldn't calm down for her either. And it's funny, like when I replay it in my mind, I don't know if this is accurate, but I just remember the two guidance counselors looking at each other like in frozen terror because this hysterical teenager was brought to them. I was 16 and
Oh,
yeah, I was in probably grade 10 or 11. I don't know. Anyway, so they the one guidance counselor bundled me up into her car and drove me to the hospital because she didn't know what else to do with me. I just
wow.
was crying. I was not even coherent. I couldn't even really explain why I was upset, just that my mom was going to be so mad. And
I would
I don't
imagine
even know.
that would be like a kind of, I don't know if it was at the time, but it's a validation to be driven to the hospital in a state like that. Like someone saw it as this person needs help.
Yeah, I could interpret that now. At the time, I think I was just frozen, like
Yeah.
I was not really aware of what was
Yeah.
happening around me. Pretty dissociated, maybe.
Hmm.
And I have because I have no idea. I just remember she was saying she was taking me to the hospital, and from that somehow I have no memory of how this happened. I ended up connected with a social worker.
Wow.
Um, in Ontario, I grew up in Ontario. We have Children's Aid out there. I don't know if it was Children's Aid specifically, but I ended up seeing a social worker about, I'm going to say 4 to 6 times. And I don't know that I ever could really articulate what was wrong, like what was
Hmm.
wrong. I couldn't tell you. And this is what I look at when I do my own counseling as a 16-year-old in massive distress with just kind of like a generically kind of crappy life, like nothing really wrong.
Hmm.
I couldn't articulate a goal. Like,
Oh,
so I think about that when I'm working
exactly.
with kids and we're supposed to come up with goals and treatment plans. And I don't think that's a bad thing to explore or consider. But I just remember that if someone asked me what my goal was, I'd be like, uh, to get out of my house. I don't
Yeah.
know.
And
Yeah.
who's it for? Like I sometimes think that
Yeah.
who's all this goal setting for? Like often
I
it's for a
know.
system. It's not really for the client.
Yeah.
Or it's for us to feel like we're able to check a box if something actually changes. It's like if we're lucky enough that we've impacted, we want to, but we don't always know if we have. But I don't know for
Yeah.
especially teenagers, I agree.
Yeah. Sometimes I value it if I've been seeing, like I said, I think it's good to talk about in terms of just planting
Hmm.
a seed for somebody. Like to think about what is it? How would you like to be? How would you like your life to be? That's a great goal to start sort of thinking about. I don't think of it as a goal myself. It's just kind of the direction we want to move in, but
Hmm.
the technical language is goals, right? So I think it's helpful sometimes if you've been seeing someone for a long time and you find you're like circling things and you're not sure where things are going, and maybe things have settled, like the original
Yeah,
distress or upset or crisis is kind of settled. And then it's like, okay, now how do you want to make use of this time? You know,
right.
sometimes kids or teens are happy to come in and meet with us weekly, but is it actually helping them? So at a certain point, I do like to look at and go, like, what do you want to get out of coming here? And if it is just
Right.
comfort of having an adult who will listen to you, then I'll do that for a while.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, you're right. Like, but if it gets asked too early and they don't really know
Hmm.
you, and like if someone had asked you that while you were in hospital, like
They maybe did. I have no
you
idea.
probably didn't give a very directive answer because how could
Yeah.
you? You're right. Like,
Hmm.
yeah.
Well, when I think back, I was still like, I have more clarity around it now, but at that time, I was very, very deep in, like, I was angry and upset about things, but I was also very deep in self-blame and wondering, like, why I couldn't just be a better daughter. Why it's really like, why couldn't I just be good? And
Oh,
yeah,
I get that. Yeah.
yeah.
Did you ever come out of that?
Why can't I just be good?
I'm only
Uh,
asking because I clearly feel like I haven't ever.
Yeah, no, I think it's changed a bit over time, but I definitely still carry that little piece of me that feels like I've been bad,
Hmm.
or that somehow I'm deficient or lacking. Even the other night, my husband and I had what's kind of funny, but a little interaction about the phone. He gets irritated sometimes because I can end up scrolling on my phone.
Hmm.
And I'd been on my phone a bit, and he came in and he just kind of said, "Hey, I noticed you're on your phone again," or something like that. And I got really, really mad. And I know at the root of that was that I felt shamed, like, oh, I've
Hmm.
messed up again. I've spent too much time on my phone today, you know? So
Yeah.
very ready
It's
to blame myself for small things. So I have to step back. I have more tools to deal with that now, but it lives inside me. I can't imagine it'll ever be completely gone, but maybe.
Well, we live in hope. That's why we
Yeah.
keep going to therapy.
Yeah. Well, right now it's just a part of myself I have a lot of compassion for, and
Hmm.
try to spend a little time checking in with those parts of myself that are really young, really
Hmm.
wounded, really hurting, and
My
just
thing
sort of,
is,
yeah, it's okay.
I always feel like I'm going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
Like some,
Yeah, that's what it was.
someone's going to be mad. I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
Whatever they think I did, I probably did it. Like I'd be fucked if I was ever accused of a murder I didn't commit. Because I'd think that I did
You'd be
it.
like, I don't know, did I do it?
I would. I'd be on the electric.
Possible.
I'd be on the electric chair in no time. Like I swear, if a doctor said to me, "Do you think you could be pregnant?" I would probably go, "Oh my God, could I be pregnant?" Even after having a hysterectomy and in menopause. It runs deep,
Yeah,
that stuff like that. When you
really
feel,
deep.
it's almost like you're handed this plate of responsibility as a baby and you're expected to digest this big steak of responsibility. Like,
Hmm.
and you just can't digest that amount of misplaced responsibility because it was never your
Mhm.
job to raise
Mhm.
siblings.
And it's funny because those kinds of incidents, those are actually the easy ones to recognize and notice and work through. They get harder the further you go back. And I think, that was a bit, emotionally abusive to lose it on me for my brother falling on his face or whatever. Um, I was told often I was lazy and selfish. Those were the two big ones, lazy and
Mhm.
selfish. And but going back, childhood emotional neglect is something that has been really overlooked traditionally. Like it started to be recognized. I don't know, what would you say, the last 10 or 20 years maybe was when it first really got noticed. And this idea that it's not so much what happened to you, it's the things that didn't happen, you
Oof.
know? And I can remember being in my master's program and sort of putting some pieces together. And I recall being told, I don't have a memory of this, but I recall being told of a couple of different incidents where I was found crying in my crib, crying and crying and crying. And my mom was not able to look after me. She had a lot of, I don't want to talk about her stuff, but
Mhm.
um, she just wasn't able. And I remember asking my instructor in my master's as like a 40 some odd year old woman, but is that enough to produce this like deep hole inside me? Like, is that where that comes from? And I don't actually remember her answer,
Oh, I was
but
on the edge of my seat there. Okay, can I just like take this chance to answer it?
I
Yes.
yeah, yeah. But it's funny because I have to ask and answer that question for myself over and over.
I
And
get,
it's like
yes.
I get it cognitively. If someone else told me their story, I'd be like, yeah, of course. I get it cognitively. And then I think it sinks in. I don't forget it anymore. It's almost like I would forget that, oh yeah, that's what that deep hole of emptiness inside me is about.
Yeah,
Um, but now I always know it cognitively, and I'm starting to accept it with the rest, with my heart, with my
integrate
gut,
it.
with my soul, to integrate it. Yeah.
Well, when you said that, I mean, when you said like we're only starting to recognize emotional neglect, yeah, I still have a hard time not shaming myself when I think that way because
Mhm.
there's lots of messages that between the generations, older generations that think it's just this weakness of this new
Mm,
generation that can't handle what we could handle. I've even said it myself. So then
mhm.
I question when it has been really harmful to me, I question, am I just too needy? Am I just too entitled? Am I just
Right.
picking on my parents? Am I just overly
Mhm.
critical? Like it's hard to really say, yes, that really affected me. And it's okay that it
Yeah.
did. Like it's
Yeah.
allowed to be called that. And even our systems that are in place to
Mhm.
protect children have a really hard time protecting them from emotional harm.
Yeah. It's so hard to intervene in a meaningful way
You know,
with emotional.
one of the things that I learned going to a support group was they actually laid it out like, emotional harm happens when something is over and over and over and
Mhm.
over. It's not
Mhm.
the one or two times a parent, like any parent, just lost their cool.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Which I find comforting now because I've been that parent now who's lost my cool at times,
Totally, me too.
and it's trying not to repeat the patterns of disconnect, of anger, of um, ridiculous expectations of these underformed brains in our young children, you
Well,
know.
nobody mirrored for you that you were a
Mhm.
child and they were the adult.
Well, and that's where I think one of my resilient factors, because I remember a long time ago also thinking like, how is it I'm actually okay? When I sat down and looked over through a series of different counselors over time, looked at, you know, all the different things that had either happened or that had not happened for me.
Mhm.
And learning about the power of other adults in a kid's life. So when there isn't a parent who can consistently provide guidance, support, co-regulation, emotional containment, validation, empathy, all of those things. It is really helpful if there's another adult in the person's life who can, and that was my grandmother.
Mm.
And it took me a long time to come to peace with the fact that she was not that for my mom. Like, I
Wow.
remember when I had the realization, oh, my experience of my grandmother was very different from my mom's. And I don't know whether my grandmother was that different or if whatever had happened in my mom's life had created challenges. There was a whole trauma story there. Um, but my grandma was definitely my rock, my go-to. And she would understand and listen and all those things we do as therapists, validate
Mhm.
that I had valid feelings, and she stopped short of pitting me against my mom. I don't know if my mom realizes that. Like, she didn't pit me against her. She would sometimes go, yeah, I don't know why your mom does that. But I needed to hear that too. So,
Yeah.
but
Wow.
yeah.
It,
So that was powerful. And I had some aunts that played that role sometimes too, that supported me. So just having someone that, I felt like she adored me. Like,
oh, someone
there
that
was that.
delights in you. That's
Yeah,
what
I
kids
know.
need.
Yeah, and she was that. She sometimes didn't necessarily have time for me either. Like, I can remember being at her house and spending a lot of time watching TV. You know who actually was one of the influential figures in my life too? Was Leo Buscaglia. Did you
Oh,
ever
I remember.
see?
I never saw him, but I read his book on love.
When I was little, I can't remember how old I was, but I remember sitting in the TV room. I used to watch like cowboy shows and Little House on the Prairie and Sunday afternoon movies, all those things.
Hmm.
And yeah, Leo Buscaglia did a whole series of talks, and I loved listening to him. He brought
Oh,
me such hope and made me feel like, there was something good in the world and that I could do something good in the world. Like,
he was your
I've
TV
often,
dad.
he was my TV dad. Yeah. It's funny because I've thought about, I would love to reach out to his family and just let them know how much he meant to me. Like,
Oh,
I
wow.
feel sometimes like he saved my life,
Yeah.
you know? He was one of the people that helped save my life.
Well, I'm glad you never got the TV taken away from you too, because that would have sucked. Then you would have been really fucked.
Yeah.
I had
That's,
Charles and Caroline Ingalls were my
yeah.
dream mom and dad from
Yeah.
TV, and the
And
Brady
Facts of
Bunch.
Life. I remember Facts
Oh,
of Life. I used to
yeah,
dream of being Joe on Facts of Life. I had a lot of characters and books as well. That
yeah.
was another thing. I think being able to imagine myself, like, I lived inside my mind a ton. Like, when the movie and the book came out about the secret life of Walter Mitty, that was one of those moments when I went, well, doesn't everybody do that?
So how many times did you plan your funeral in great detail? Did you do that lots?
A few times. That wasn't a big one. I usually imagined myself as a superhero.
Oh,
A
that's nice.
superhero. So one big one was a superhero. That was one huge theme. There were two main themes, superhero, and the other one was that I was secretly the long lost twin of a princess from some other world with magical powers, and they found me and brought me home.
Oh, love it. You want to know what
Yeah.
my fantasy was often that I was being rescued. Like that I'd had a
Mm-hmm.
terrible accident or something really bad
Mm-hmm.
happened and I was found beside the road and someone kind rescued me. It was often a male, like an adult
Mm-hmm.
male, rescued me and kind of saw my pain. I fantasized about
Wow.
that like my entire childhood. In deep
I,
detail.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And mine was being the rescuer.
Yeah, that's
It was
that's why
always,
we're perfect together. Ugh. Ah.
yeah.
So when you go to therapy as a therapist now, what's it
Mhm.
like being a therapist in therapy?
Um, it's still really vulnerable. Like, I would, it's funny, you would think that having been a therapist for this many years, having seen a lot of therapists, you would think it would be easier, but I find it's really not. It's really vulnerable. I do find I'm better able to advocate for myself, or in the sense of just not continuing with a therapist that doesn't suit me. I've
Mhm.
seen a couple of really terrible therapists, and I think that was a good experience for me to have, because I know what it's like to see a terrible therapist, and I
Yeah.
never want to put somebody through that. Um, but yeah, it's really vulnerable to, it takes me a little bit to trust that I can really open up.
Mhm.
But when I find that, I just love it.
Do you have a terrible story?
Yeah.
Oh, let's hear it.
You want to hear it?
Yeah.
So I went to this therapist, and his his therapy room was in the basement of his house, and it smelled like the basement of a house, for starters. Like, it smelled moldy. So I walked in there, and there was that. Then I
Mm.
walked in, and he spent the first, I don't know, 10 minutes or so telling me all about his qualifications, his degree, his training, how smart he was. And I'm like, okay. This was before I was a therapist. So I'm still kind of like, okay, maybe this is normal. And then he
Oh,
found out where I worked at the time, and he had an issue with some of the people I worked with. So he told me all about his drama,
oh my Lord. Like his personal
his
shit?
personal issue. Yeah, his personal shit. Like, it wasn't self-disclosure in a meaningful way, you know?
Wait.
And and then he gave me a stack of books to read. And I actually am a reader, so I bought every book he talked about and brought them all back. And oh, the other thing that happened was he knew exactly what to ask to make me cry. And it wasn't a safe, healing cry. It felt like
Oh.
shitty, vulnerable manipulation.
It felt like he knew how to
And
pick a scab
he
before it
was
was ready.
pushing, yeah, he was pushing buttons. Like, he was really
Oh,
digging into, and probably some areas I need to work on. But that's when I learned a few things from that. One was, people don't, if they don't ask about my qualifications, I'm not going to waste their time telling them about them.
I don't think I've ever initiated that without yeah,
No, I've had a
that's
few people ask, which is fair.
yeah. Yeah.
And I don't mind talking about it. But yeah, so I don't volunteer that. I don't have my degrees up on the wall, things
Mhm.
like that. Um, I learned that bibliotherapy is not the answer to everything.
'Cause
So
if it was, this whole field wouldn't need to exist.
yeah, exactly. And I still personally, I'm probably the biggest hoarder of books you
You
might
are. I
ever
know
meet.
this about
Like,
you. So this says a lot. Don't give someone who's starting to relive their childhood trauma a book as your main intervention.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the issue I had come about wasn't about my childhood trauma. I had come about, I can't remember what the specific thing was, but I'd come about a specific thing that had recently happened that I was really struggling with. I know now it was related to my childhood trauma, why I struggled that much, and why I had allowed a relationship so unhealthy for me to do what it did. But I wasn't asking to go to my childhood trauma, and I wasn't ready for it. And I got, like, pushed there on a bullet train.
Oof.
It's one thing to speculate, and, I
Yeah.
wonder, and do you think about this? But he was really like, it was like he had an ice pick, and he was just chipping away at all the
Oof.
stuff that I had kept so tightly bound and protected for so many years, and I wasn't ready.
He wasn't
So,
attuning.
no, not at all. no. And then so I'm crying and crying. And then he's like, okay, here's a stack of books and I'll see you in a couple of weeks and whatever. We made an appointment and I went back.
Oh,
I thought, okay, the
right?
first time, we'll see. Second time I went back, I was like, wow, this guy's terrible. Like, he does not get me. He might be very smart. He might know a lot of stuff. Some of the books he got me to buy, they were decent. Like, they were not unhelpful, but
You
it
know,
wasn't a good experience.
this is this hits me really deep. I actually remember you telling me about this at the time.
Hmm.
I remember that you
Hmm.
went back, and I remember you being surprised that you had gone back later.
Yeah.
But what strikes me so much is how many clients who are not in the field will go back to people that don't feel right to them because
Hmm.
I think, well, because of the power imbalance. And maybe they just
Yeah.
think they're supposed to, like, it's probably their fault, right? Like, I mean, we have lots of wounds we go to counseling with, and one of them is I'm going to self blame a lot. And so if
Yeah.
this isn't working, it's probably me.
Yeah.
But thank God you only went back once,
One more
one more
time. Yeah.
time. Yeah, because I did that too. I had somebody I didn't, there was lots wrong with it, and I just kept going, thinking I need to work harder at
Hmm.
this, or I need to
Hmm.
be a better, I don't know, be more of what this
Hmm.
person wants me to be.
I must not be doing this right,
Yeah.
this client thing.
Right.
Fortunately, I had a really good counselor a number of years earlier, um, who, like, even since my teenage one, I had one when I was in the force. That was
Oh,
funny. I
that's
thought I was having heart problems. Turns out I was having anxiety, but nobody actually told me that.
oh.
Just told me I needed to see a counselor. I'm like, okay. So I went and saw, then you had to see a psychologist back then. So
Mm,
I saw her quite a bit and she was really great. Like, she was
mm.
really very real, really liked her. Kind of wanted her to be my mom or be my best friend. I sent her
That's a good
Christmas
sign.
cards the first couple of years.
That's a good sign. That's what's
Yeah.
supposed to happen, right? Fall in
Yeah.
love a little and get
Yeah.
reparented.
I felt seen. It was really incredible. It was amazing
Wow.
to have, and she very gently led me through. She actually went into some of my childhood stuff, but in a really safe way, allowing me to go where it felt right. I'm sure she looked at me and went, "Oh my gosh, this and this happened." But she didn't just come out and,
Hammer you
poke
with it.
away at all my shields. She knew I needed my armor still.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, that's such a good contrast of like,
Hmm.
yeah, I was thinking earlier, like, it is individual what would make someone not have a good experience. But then there's some
Hmm.
basic universal things like complete lack of attunement, unsafe
Yeah.
environment. Like when you're going into someone's basement, like it has to be set
Yeah.
up a certain way to feel okay. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
there's some basic
I
things.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I've been to other therapists who have their room in their home and it's been fine. That was a different experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to go back to that one thing we were talking about, that tendency to self-blame. And we've talked about this before, but I just want to recognize that, when kids are really young, when they're babies, infants, then young toddlers, and kids are the ones that are wired to connect, to attune, to attach to the parent.
Right.
And when it comes down to painful things happening, if the kid has to choose who's right and who's wrong, they're going to choose that the parent is right and they're wrong because their survival depends on the parent still receiving them.
Oh,
So kids at that
so
really young
true.
age, that self blame that runs early, early, early.
And it's
You know.
so productive and self-protective and
Hmm.
almost like the word that comes to me is like evolutionary. Like
Yeah.
it protects their life. Because
Yeah.
to a small child, being without a parental some being without a parent is death
Yeah. Yeah.
at a psychic
So
level, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just like it's just like all these things make sense, but then at some point they just stop working. Like then they become the problem. It's so
Yeah.
unfair.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
it's so unfair. But I guess
Yeah.
that's how we grow and heal is
Hmm.
it becomes painful.
Hmm. Yeah. And we're meant to evolve. And I think I mean, nobody gets through life without some pain. I look at my kids and I know that sometimes um, I've caused I've caused pain in them. I've not met their needs. So, then you get hyper focused. Oh my gosh, my kid blames himself. Was I a terrible parent? You know?
Oh, okay. Being a parent and a therapist is its own kind of hell.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
hell because
I see
you're
my
not
I
a
see my kids.
therapist with your kids. So then you're
I
not
know.
a parent, and then you have this therapy brain that goes, I'm damaging them for life. Oh, it's awful.
Or you try and respond to something and you get the mom, don't be a counselor with me.
Yeah, you're using
Yeah.
that tone. Stop it. Yeah.
I look at them sometimes and I'm like, a little EMDR would fix that right up.
I remember when I was going through hypnosis training and I was trying to talk them into
Mhm.
letting me hypnotize them. That was a no. That was like a flat no, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be
Yeah.
hypnotizing your own kids, but I would have.
I
I would
actually
have tried.
I actually remember one time I was talking with one of my kids who was struggling with some anxiety and a bit of panic and stuff like that. And I said something about, do you want me to help you through a calming technique? And I was expecting a no, so I was not actually prepared. When my kid said yes, I'm like, oh man, I got to come up with something on the spot now. So I did. It was fine. It was good. I just did the, put your hand on your heart, feel yourself breathe, look out the window at the mountains, you know,
Oh, that's so
just
nice.
let your hand
That's
rest
like
there.
the mother you needed.
Yeah.
You became the mother you needed.
Yeah.
I remember laying with one of my kids when they were about 8 and having terrible anxiety. And I remember I actually said, given my job, I feel like I should be able to help you with this, but I have no idea what to do. Oh, it's awful.
It is so different when it's your own kids. I
Helpless.
find that. Yeah.
Yeah, helpless.
It's yeah. It'd be like trying to give yourself heart surgery.
As soon as that anesthetic goes in, it just doesn't go anywhere after that. What do you
Uh,
think you've needed sanctuary from in terms of this profession? Like, what about being a therapist do you go, oh, I need sanctuary, I need refuge from this part of the work?
mm-hmm. Oh, um, that's a hard question, actually. And I think it varies over time. I mean, sometimes I just need a bit of sanctuary and space from the stories because I've heard a lot of really heavy stories, and sometimes they really, I really feel it. I really feel for people.
Yeah,
Um, but I feel like I don't know that I'd want sanctuary from that because that's an important part of the work. Like it's
right.
not something that overwhelms me. It's just real. I wouldn't want to shut that out. I think
Mm.
sanctuary maybe from the the marketing and like business aspect of this work.
Oh, that's
I just want to
interesting.
sit with people and talk with them about their stuff and learn. Like I want the space to
Yeah,
be able to learn whatever it is someone needs me to know. And so sanctuary from a bit of the both the having to do marketing and business work as
mhm.
part of this because I am not the best business mind.
Me
Um,
either.
and also the marketing that comes at us now. Like I don't know if you've noticed this trend, but
Ugh.
there's like a million different kinds of therapy. Everybody's got their own
Yes.
institute. You have to take this. $2 to $5 to $10,000 course to be certified in this. Like,
Yeah.
I understand, like, because people have to make a living, and
Yeah.
and there does need to be some management of how people are doing certain kinds of therapy so that they're not going out harming people by doing something that they don't really understand. But it's a bit overwhelming sometimes. Like, I have
Yeah.
to, like, this about me, I'm always in another training,
Yeah. You
always
are.
attending
You're
different.
very committed to learning. So
Mhm.
yeah, it really hits home that it is overkill so much. I think
Mm.
like maybe what it does is it gives us this impression that we are never enough. Just the
Yeah.
relational part, which is the part that most people say makes the difference, is that person. You said it about that woman
Hmm.
that you saw. She was real.
Hmm.
She attuned to you. You didn't probably
Hmm.
care what training she'd been to.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly what she said, but she basically, the message to me was, of course you're having a hard time. Your life sucks. That's what I
Yes,
needed to hear.
that's
And
what
like,
so
even
many of us need.
so, personality disorders, which can be kind of a tricky area to work with, people say, um, e- even he who has this more medical maybe perspective or genetic perspective on personality disorders said, you are not going to get anywhere with a personality disorder, someone who's struggling with that, unless you have a relationship with them.
Right.
And I
It's
was like, yeah,
It's the
you
basics.
know,
I talked to this guy, his name is David McPhee, and he's been on the show and he's retired now. He's like living the beautiful life of retirement. And
mm-hmm,
he kind of, I feel like he now says all the things that maybe you feel like you can't fully say when you're in your career. And one of the things I remember he said to me was, what pisses his supervisees off is when he kind of doesn't give a shit about all these fancy trainings. He, like, he's back to Uncle Carl and making the
yeah,
connection and what's really important. And he basically
mm-hmm,
said, and I feel like this is true, a lot of the trainings are just repackaged stuff that we already know.
yes,
You know,
yeah,
there's not much that's really new. Like, I think in its day, EMDR was really new. I think in its day,
mm-hmm,
DBT was really new. But so much of it, like, it's like the Sears catalog. Those
mm-hmm.
sweaters from the 80s all of a sudden are back 20 years later, but they look a little different, but it's the same.
I just had this flash in my mind of the Sears action pose. How people would all be in those predictable poses, the arm
Yeah.
up, the big smile as they're looking
Oh,
at something together.
or the women that would kind of lean back with their hips forward. The hell was that? But the sweater I think of that I always remember I think of when I think of things coming back around. Do you remember the ones that would have like a diamond shape and then an X through it?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Those
Yeah,
come back so many times. They're not
I know.
new.
They
But
never quite go away.
and then I almost do you ever get kind of bitter like when someone proclaims they've discovered this new great thing like
Yeah.
vulnerability or like uh not mentioning any names, BB or like and I don't want to sound bitter, so I don't want to say it, but there's
Yeah.
some things that catch on in popular culture that are like age-old concepts in therapy.
Hmm. Well, I am reaching the point now where, I'll read a little excerpt on a training, and I'll maybe watch the intro video or whatever it is, and I'll be really excited initially, and
Yep.
then they'll start talking and I'm like, "Oh, that's just this in a new package." But I have to say, it's been really cool learning. I did originally the traditional EMDR, and now I've been diving back into EMDR with attachment focused EMDR, which is a
Yeah.
much better fit for my style.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that rigid EMDR process,
Script.
but I felt
Yeah.
like I had to. So I had a lot of trouble with it. So the attachment focused EMDR feels like a much better fit. And I've also taken some IFS trainings, not the proper level one, because I actually don't have enough money and time to try and do
And you
that.
have to win a flipping lottery.
Yeah, they've ditched the lottery system, but
Oh, good.
whatever. It's still it's hard to get into. And I don't know, yeah, but I'm finding the processing, like what strikes me is how similar the processing is that happens inside the person. So you
Yeah.
can use EMDR to go there, or you can use IFS to go there. And some people use one more easily than the other. And so I find being able to weave them together a little bit is really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And now my next one that I really want to learn about that I'm thinking I probably know more than I think is mentalization. Because
Oh.
mentalization is, a big
Mm-hmm.
a big training that's being
Up
mentioned.
and
I've
coming.
come across
Yeah.
it many times lately,
Yeah.
how helpful it is. So I want to do a little more research into that. Um, yeah, ACT, CBT, DBT,
I mean, it's all
all
like,
the
I mean, I think we both have a love affair with learning. You know,
yeah.
I've never not wanted to learn, but yeah, I know what you mean about you get kind of jaded by the packaged, branded, marketed trainings that are going to cost you an arm and a leg that really
Mm-hmm.
feel more like a sales job
Mm-hmm.
than I don't know. I
Mm-hmm.
find
And
now
it's
what I
not that
like to
there's
do is the ones where I'm immersed in it, like the training
yeah.
where you get to really experience it. I want to do psychedelic. I want to have a
Oh.
psychedelic experience. I would love to try that. I don't think I'd ever want to do that work, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I mean, there's lots of
Hmm.
that I'd love to do, and
Yeah.
I think it's important that we know we are and who you are is enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like who you are is what your clients connect to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has
Yeah.
been fun. Thank you so much
Ah.
for being here and sharing all that.
Mm-hmm.
Could go on,
Thank
but
you.
we will bring it
I
to a
know. I
close.
didn't even tell you my whole pathway to where I ended up in
Yeah,
counseling, but
you skipped an entire career probation.
yeah, but that's okay.
So fascinating. Well, you'll have to come back and then we'll get
I'll
into that.
come back sometime. Yeah,
Okay.
you bet.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.